Captain, they're hailing us again, Lieutenant Mira Patel announced, not bothering to hide her exasperation. The Veldurian ambassador demands to know why our primitive vessel is cluttering their approach vector. Jack Hawkins paused his linguistic analysis and glanced up from his workstation on the bridge of the UES Curiosity. Earth's first and only diplomatic starship looked impressive in the promotional materials back home, but was apparently the equivalent of showing up to a yacht club in a rowboat with a bedsheet sail. Tell them, Commander Elena Rodriguez began, then pinched the bridge of her nose. Tell them we're maintaining our assigned coordinates as provided by Galactic Central Traffic Control. Jack watched the exchange with detached academic interest. As the ship's senior xenolinguist, he wasn't technically part of the command crew, but Rodriguez valued his insights on alien communication. 6 months into humanity's grand entrance onto the galactic stage, and they were still being treated like confused toddlers who had somehow stumbled into an adults-only venue. Ambassador Thexkral suggests we could better serve the galaxy by returning to our charming little solar system and developing proper technologies before attempting to join civilized society, Mira translated, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface as she softened the alien's actual wording, which contained significantly more references to primate excrement. Respond with Diplomatic Protocol 7, Rodriguez ordered, which everyone aboard had come to recognize as polite acknowledgement while ignoring the insult. Jack returned to his research, swiping through ancient Veldurian text fragments. The dominant species in this sector of the galaxy, Veldurians, resembled upright leopard geckos with an extra set of arms and a superiority complex that made historical British colonialism look humble by comparison. We're 30 minutes from docking at Galactic Council Station, the pilot announced. Everyone remember to look impressed but not too impressed. Ambassador Chen says we need to appear confidently developing rather than hopelessly outclassed. Jack snorted. Humanity had barely mastered FTL travel when they encountered the galactic community, which had been zipping between stars for millennia. What Earth considered breakthrough technology made alien engineers chuckle indulgently. Their only real bargaining chip was that Earth sat on valuable resources and a strategic position in the spiral arm. Dr. Hawkins, Commander Rodriguez called. Final briefing in 10 minutes. This council session will determine Earth's protected status application. If we fail, she didn't need to finish. Without protected status, Earth would be open to cultural assimilation, a polite term for becoming an exploited backwater serving more advanced civilizations. Jack nodded grimly. Everything about humanity's future hinged on making a good impression at the council. Unfortunately, first impressions had already established humans as the galaxy's amusing new pets. Somehow they needed to change that perception, fast. The Galactic Council chamber resembled a massive amphitheater crossed with a bioluminescent coral reef. Crystalline platforms suspended in anti-gravity fields hosted representatives from over 300 spacefaring civilizations. The human delegation, consisting of Ambassador Chen, Commander Rodriguez, Jack Mira, and 2 security officers, stood on the smallest platform, positioned conspicuously near the waste recycling vents. Approach recognized, boomed the council speaker, a gaseous entity contained within an ornate hovering vessel. Earth delegation, you may present your petition for protected status under Galactic Ordinance 5529B. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral despite the obvious slight of their positioning. Honorable Council, we come before you as representatives of humanity, seeking recognition and protection as we join the galactic community. A ripple of what Jack recognized as laughter passed through several delegations. The Veldurian ambassador, Thexkral, moved his platform forward with a theatrical flourish. Esteemed colleagues, he began, his voice simultaneously silky and grating, I must question the wisdom of extending protected status to a species that only recently discovered that their sun doesn't orbit their planet. His upper arms gesticulated dramatically while his lower set activated a holographic display. Observe their propulsion technology, still partially reliant on chemical thrust. Their communication systems, barely capable of quantum entanglement. Their medical science, still fighting microscopic organisms. The chamber erupted in what could only be described as interspecies snickering. Furthermore, Thexkral continued, clearly enjoying himself, humans have demonstrated remarkable propensity for self-destruction. Their history is littered with global conflicts, environmental mismanagement, and reality entertainment programming. Jack winced at that last one. Somehow, alien civilizations had intercepted Earth's television broadcasts, and keeping up with the Kardashians had become their primary reference point for human culture. The Veldurian Empire recommends categorizing Earth as a Level 3 developing world, Dexcrawl concluded, eligible for controlled technological exchange and cultural guidance under our direct supervision. Jack didn't need his linguistic expertise to translate, colony status essentially. Ambassador Chen attempted to counter, our technological development curve is exponential. In merely a century, we've progressed from basic flight to interstellar travel, using principles discovered by the Arcturian collective 12,000 years ago, interrupted a chitinous delegate Jack couldn't identify. Our cultural achievements, Chen tried again, include weaponizing the atom before achieving planetary unity, called out another voice. Commander Rodriguez stepped forward. We respectfully remind the Council that Earth's resources and strategic position are precisely why supervision is necessary. The Gaskrel smoothly interjected. Humans have demonstrated they cannot be trusted with their own planet, let alone participate as equals in galactic affairs. The speaker's vessel pulsed with blue light. The Council will now vote on Earth's petition for protected status versus the Veldorian recommendation for Level 3 classification. Jack's stomach sank as he watched the chamber's central holographic display fill with red indicators. The vote wasn't even close. By Council consensus, the speaker announced, Earth is hereby classified as a Level 3 developing world under Veldorian guidance, effective immediately. The human delegation is granted 30 standard cycles to prepare for transition of authority. Ambassador Chen's face remained impressively composed, but Jack could see her knuckles whitening as she gripped the platform railing. We acknowledge the Council's decision, she said stiffly, and request time to consult with our government regarding implementation. Granted, the speaker replied disinterestedly. This session is concluded. As their platform descended toward the exit, Jack caught the Gaskrel watching them, his reptilian face bearing what any human would recognize as a smug smile. 1 month, Rodriguez murmured. We have 1 month before they legally start carving up Earth like a Thanksgiving turkey. Jack nodded grimly. Back to the ship. I need to check something in the archives. The UES Curiosities database room hardly deserved the name. It was actually a converted storage closet housing the ship's collection of alien texts, cultural records, and historical documents, pitifully small compared to any proper galactic library. But it was all Earth had managed to acquire through trades and diplomatic gifts. Jack had been practically living in this closet since their humiliating council session 3 days ago. His workstation was surrounded by empty coffee cups, protein bar wrappers, and holographic projections of ancient texts from a dozen alien civilizations. The door hissed open, and Mira entered with 2 fresh cups of coffee. Please tell me you've slept at some point, she said, nudging aside debris to set down his cup. Sleep is for species not facing imminent colonization, Jack replied, grabbing the coffee gratefully. But I think I've found something. Look at this. He gestured to a floating projection of Veldorian text. This is from their Book of Origins, practically their religious text. And this, he pulled up another projection showing Sanskrit characters, is a passage from the Rig Veda. Okay. Mira looked puzzled. What am I missing? Watch. Jack manipulated the projections, isolating specific characters and placing them side by side. The phonetic structure, the grammatical patterns, there are similarities that can't be coincidental. Mira leaned closer, her scientific curiosity piqued. That's weird, but couldn't it just be linguistic convergent evolution? Similar communication needs producing similar structures. I thought so too, until I found this. Jack pulled up another document, this one clearly much older than the others. This is from the Arcturus Historical Archive. It references what they call the progenitors, apparently some ancient highly advanced civilization that disappeared about 50,000 years ago. The progenitors? Mira raised an eyebrow. Sounds like the plot of a bad sci-fi vid. Everything about our current situation sounds like bad sci-fi, Jack retorted. But here's where it gets interesting. According to these fragments, the progenitors seeded in various worlds with their genetic material before vanishing, and their sacred language, he highlighted a section of text, was called verbum primordial. Mira's eyes widened. That's Latin. The phrase is literally in Latin. Exactly. Jack's fingers flew across the interface, pulling up more comparisons. And it doesn't stop there. Look at these phonetic patterns in ancient Greek, in Hebrew, in Sanskrit. They all share structural similarities with what the Veldorians call the First Tongue, their most sacred and ancient language that only their priests and scholars still study. Mira sank into the chair beside him. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? That humans are descendants of the progenitors? Maybe. Jack ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Or at least we might share common ancestry with the Veldorians and other species. Our planet might have been one of the progenitors' seeded worlds. But the Veldorians evolved from reptilian stock, and we're mammals. How? I don't have all the answers, Jack admitted. But the linguistic connections are undeniable. Earth languages preserve patterns from the progenitor language that even the Veldorians have lost over time. Our planet was isolated for millennia. Maybe that preserved aspects of the original language that evolved differently elsewhere. Commander Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom, interrupting their discussion. Dr. Hawkins, Lieutenant Patel, report to my quarters immediately. Minutes later they stood before Rodriguez, who looked as sleep-deprived as Jack felt. Please tell me you have something, the commander said without preamble. Earth Central is panicking. The Veldorians have already submitted their transition plan. They're basically dividing our planet into administrative sectors. Jack and Mira exchanged glances. Commander, Jack began. What would you say if I told you we might be related to the Veldorians, and that humans might actually be preserving the language of their most revered ancestors? Rodriguez stared at him for a long moment. I'd say you better have some damn good evidence, because we're about to stake the future of our entire species on whatever you've found. Jack placed a data crystal on her desk. It's circumstantial but compelling. And more importantly, it might be our only shot. Rodriguez picked up the crystal, turning it thoughtfully in her fingers. How certain are you about this connection? Jack hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary. The linguistic similarities are real. The historical interpretation is speculative. But remember, the Veldorians and the Council don't know how speculative. They don't have experts in Earth languages. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Rodriguez's face. So you're saying we have something they don't? For once, exactly, Jack nodded. And if we play this right, they'll never know how thin the ice we're standing on actually is. A bluff, Rodriguez mused. A galactic-scale bluff using their own sacred history against them. She tapped her desk, thinking. Dr. Hawkins, how quickly can you learn to speak their ancient language? With Mira's help and the ship's language acquisition programs, maybe a week to reach basic fluency in formal phrases. Rodriguez nodded decisively. Start immediately. I'll inform Ambassador Chen that we've discovered new information critical to our case. She stood up, suddenly energized. We're requesting an emergency council session in 10 days. And this time we're not going as supplicants. Again Jack insisted, his voice hoarse from hours of practice. The glottal stop is more pronounced, like you're swallowing the last syllable. Mira glared at him over her steaming mug of synthetic coffee, their fifth of the morning. If I pronounce it any more dramatically, I'll choke myself. They sat in what had once been the ship's recreation room but had been transformed into a crash course language laboratory. Holographic projections of Veldorian text fragments covered every surface, and audio recordings of reconstructed pronunciations played on a continuous loop in the background. The door slid open and Commander Rodriguez entered with Ambassador Chen. Both looked exhausted but determined. Progress report, Rodriguez demanded, bypassing any greeting. Jack rubbed his eyes. We've reconstructed about 70% of what we're calling Proto-Veldorian based on their ancient texts and linguistic drift patterns. It's challenging. Their vocal apparatus is structured differently from ours. But doable, Chen pressed. Yes, Mira answered. The critical ceremonial phrases are manageable. We've focused on formal address, declarations of lineage and statements of authority, the things most heavily preserved in their ritual language. Jack pulled up a new holographic display. We've also assembled a team of quick studies. The display showed 4 crew members practicing pronunciation exercises. Lieutenant Park from Astrophysics has a background in phonetics. Ensign Okafor is a polyglot who already speaks 7 Earth languages. Dr. Wolcott from Medical has perfect pitch, which helps with the tonal aspects, and Security Chief Diaz has, surprisingly, an ear for dialect subtleties. And how much of this ancient language would a typical Veldorian understand? Chen asked skeptically. That's our advantage, Jack explained, warming to the subject. Their ancient language is like Latin was to medieval Europe, ceremonial, scholarly, known primarily to their priests and academics. The average Veldorian would recognize it as sacred but not understand details. But their scholars and leaders, the ones who matter for our purposes, would recognize enough to be shocked. Rodriguez nodded slowly. And you're certain the similarities to Earth languages are genuine? The structural patterns are undeniable, Jack confirmed. Whether it's actual common ancestry or some mind-blowing coincidence doesn't matter for our strategy. What matters is that we can pronounce their sacred tongue better than they can, and we can prove the connection to our own ancient languages, which suggests humanity might be, Chen trailed off, still struggling with the implications, descendants of their revered progenitors, Jack finished. Or at least that's what we want them to believe. Rodriguez paced the small room. Walk me through the plan again, step by step. Mira activated another display showing the council chamber layout. We've requested an emergency session to present new evidence relevant to Earth's classification. The Voldurians will expect us to make a desperate, pathetic final appeal. Instead, Ambassador Chen will begin with formal diplomatic protocol. Then, Jack continued, at the critical moment, I'll step forward and address the council in Proto-Voldurian, using their most sacred ceremonial forms. I'll declare humanity's lineage as descendants of the progenitors and demand recognition of our status. The key is the shock value, Mira added. No non-Voldurian has ever spoken their sacred language. It would be like aliens landing on Earth and perfectly reciting Hebrew, Sanskrit, and Latin prayers. What about evidence? Chen asked. They'll demand proof. Jack gestured to a data crystal. We've prepared comparative linguistic analysis that even their scholars can't refute, plus historical references from multiple species archives that support our claims. The ambiguities work in our favor. The progenitor legends are ancient and fragmented. And if they don't believe us, Rodriguez asked the question they'd all been avoiding. Jack met her gaze steadily. Then Earth becomes a colony, and we all get assigned to administrative jobs explaining human culture to our new overlords. A heavy silence fell over the room. There's one more element, Mira said quietly. We need to make this public. The full council with representatives from all species and open broadcast channels. The Veldurians care deeply about their image. If we make our claim before the entire galactic community, they can't simply dismiss it without investigation, which buys us time at minimum, Jack added. And time is something we desperately need. Rodriguez studied the displays, the practice recordings, the exhausted faces of her crew. This is the boldest diplomatic gambit in human history, she said finally. We're essentially claiming to be the long-lost gods of our would-be colonizers. Yes, Jack agreed simply. But it's also our only shot. Chen squared her shoulders. I'll prepare the formal request for an open council session. Commander, I'll need your authorization for maximum security clearance. We can't risk the Veldurians learning what we're planning. Rodriguez nodded. Granted. And I want hourly progress reports on the language training. We have 6 days left, people. Let's make them count. As they left, Jack turned back to Mira. One more time from the beginning. Sathulak Vres and Dakor. Mira sighed and repeated the phrase. This time, the glottal stop was perfect. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had drawn an unexpectedly large audience. Word had spread that the humans were making one final desperate plea, and many species had sent representatives purely for the entertainment value. The Veldurian delegation occupied their prominent platform with an air of barely concealed boredom, Ambassador Thexgrel occasionally checking what appeared to be time-keeping device. The human delegation entered the chamber with uncharacteristic formality. Ambassador Chen led the way, followed by Commander Rodriguez, Jack, Mira, and the 4 other crew members who had spent the past week in intensive language training. Unlike their previous appearance, they wore newly designed uniforms that subtly incorporated symbols Jack had discovered in progenitor artifacts. Earth delegation, the council speaker announced. You have requested this emergency session to present new evidence regarding your world's classification. Be advised that the council's patience is limited, and the transition schedule has already been approved. Ambassador Chen stepped forward. Honored speaker, esteemed council members, we thank you for this opportunity. Her voice was calm and measured, betraying none of the tension Jack knew she must be feeling. Before presenting our evidence, we wish to address the Veldurian delegation directly, as the appointed administrators of Earth. A murmur rippled through the chamber. This was not standard protocol. Thexgrel made a dismissive gesture with his lower arms. Proceed, though I fail to see the purpose of prolonging these proceedings. Chen nodded solemnly, then stepped back. I yield the floor to Dr. Jack Hawkins, Earth's senior xenolinguistic specialist. Jack moved forward, his heart pounding. Everything they had worked for came down to this moment. He took a deep breath and locked eyes with Thexgrel, then he began to speak, but not in any language the council had heard from humans before. Thex hulak vresen dakor, suth melek vretum, karish nel progenitor ax, suth melek terra. Jack pronounced each syllable with perfect intonation, the weeks of practice paying off as the ancient words flowed from his tongue. The effect was immediate and electric. Thexgrel jerked upright as if shocked, his scales flushing a deep purple, the Veldurian equivalent of going pale. Around the chamber, translators frantically worked their devices, confusion evident on many faces. But the Veldurian delegation needed no translation. Their reaction told the entire chamber something momentous was happening. Jack continued, his voice growing stronger. Thexgor vres terran, suth melek progenitor ax. Kaleth suth vrautum nes valkor. Impossible, Thexgrel hissed, all four hands gripping his platform railing. How do you know the sacred tongue? Jack switched to standard galactic common. We know it, Ambassador, because it is also our tongue. The ancient language of Earth, what we call Proto-Indo-European, Sanskrit, Latin, Ancient Greek. These are all descendants of the same root language your people call the first tongue. He gestured, and Mira activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. It showed side-by-side comparisons of Veldurian sacred texts and ancient Earth manuscripts, with key linguistic patterns highlighted. For thousands of years, Jack continued, humanity preserved aspects of the progenitor language that even the Veldurians have lost. Our planet's isolation protected these linguistic artifacts, while other worlds' languages evolved differently. The council chamber had erupted into chaos. Representatives were demanding translations, explanations, verification. The speaker's vessel pulsed with bright colors as it attempted to restore order. Thexgrel recovered some of his composure. This is unprecedented. But mere linguistic similarities prove nothing concrete. Jack had anticipated this response. He nodded to Rodriguez, who stepped forward. Which is why we brought more evidence, she announced, activating another display. This one showed genetic analyses comparing base markers from multiple species, including Veldurians and humans. Genetic structure contains patterns consistent with progenitor influence as defined in your own sacred texts. This was the most tenuous part of their claim. The genetic evidence was mostly creative interpretation of normal evolutionary patterns, but the Veldurians weren't geneticists any more than the humans were experts in Veldurian sacred history. The ambiguity worked in both directions. Jack switched back to Proto-Veldurian, delivering the most dramatic pronouncement they had practiced. Shasas verikanes progenitor ax, indakar ves kaleth, terasuth, vratum mel koresh. The chamber fell silent as the translation finally reached the various delegations. By right of the progenitors we claim our heritage. Earth stands as heir to their legacy. The speaker's vessel drifted forward. Ambassador Thexgrel, these claims are significant. What is the Veldurian response? All eyes turned to Thexgrel, who was visibly struggling with the diplomatic equivalent of having the rug pulled out from under all 4 feet. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked its usual confidence. These claims require verification, extensive verification. Our scholars must examine this evidence, consult our sacred texts, perform the proper rituals of confirmation. Of course, Jack agreed smoothly. Earth welcomes your scholars as befits our shared heritage. But until such verification is complete, surely Earth must be granted provisional protected status as a potential progenitor legacy world. The speaker turned to address the full council. This development necessitates reconsideration of Earth's classification. I propose immediate suspension of the transition schedule pending a full investigation of these claims. Jack caught Ambassador Chen's eye. She gave him the slightest nod of approval. Step 1 accomplished. They had bought Earth time. Now for Step 2. Honored Speaker, Jack said, given the significance of this discovery for all galactic civilization, Earth requests the formation of a multi-species research committee to investigate these connections between the progenitors and humanity. After all, if Earth preserved aspects of progenitor culture lost to other worlds, this is a matter of universal historical importance. This was the masterstroke of their plan, not just elevating Earth's status but ensuring the Veldurians couldn't control the investigation alone. The council chamber had transformed from a place of Earth's humiliation to the site of the most exciting xenorarchaeological discovery in centuries. Representatives were practically falling over themselves to volunteer for the research committee. As the procedural details were being worked out, Dex Krall approached the human delegation privately. "Most impressive, Dr. Hawkins," he said, studying Jack with new eyes. "I admit I did not believe humans capable of such sophistication." Jack bowed slightly, using the exact degree of inclination that Veldurian protocol reserved for equals. "Perhaps there is much we can learn from each other, Ambassador, as relatives should." 3 weeks later, the UES Curiosity's observation deck had been transformed into an impromptu celebration space. Crew members mingled with a small delegation of alien representatives, including 2 Veldurian cultural attachés who kept staring at the humans with a mixture of reverence and confusion. Jack stood by the viewport, nursing a glass of what passed for champagne in deep space, watching the swirl of diplomatic niceties with a sense of detached amusement. "To the hero of Earth," Mira said, appearing at his side with her own glass, "how does it feel to have saved our planet from colonization by convincing space lizards we're their long-lost cousins?" Jack clinked his glass against hers. "Technically, I convinced them we might be their long-lost divine ancestors, not cousins." "Much more impressive." Ambassador Chen was engaged in animated conversation with representatives from 3 different species, all of whom had requested cultural exchange programs with Earth since the revelation. Commander Rodriguez stood nearby, looking simultaneously proud and anxious, a commander's natural state. "The research committee is being formed next week," Mira said quietly. 12 species including the Veldurians. "They're sending their top linguists, historians and geneticists." Jack nodded, his expression neutral. "Should be fascinating." "Fascinating." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Jack, they're going to tear our evidence apart. They'll discover exactly how thin our claims actually are." Jack took another sip of his drink. "Will they?" Ancient history is notoriously ambiguous. Linguistic drift creates patterns that can be interpreted multiple ways, and the progenitor legends are so old and fragmented that definitive proof either way is nearly impossible. "But nothing," Jack interrupted gently. "We've created a mystery that will take decades to unravel. By the time anyone could definitively disprove our claims, if they even can, Earth will have established itself as a significant player in galactic politics." Mira stared at him. "You knew this all along, didn't you? This wasn't just about buying time. You've created a permanent place for humanity at the table." "I'm just a linguist who noticed some interesting patterns," Jack said with a small smile. "The rest was creative interpretation." "Dr. Hawkins." Dex Krall approached, making the formal gesture of greeting that, until recently, had been reserved for equals or superiors. "Our preliminary analysis of your linguistic evidence is intriguing. The similarities between your ancient Latin and our first tongue are remarkable. We look forward to exploring those connections further," Jack replied smoothly. "Indeed, the High Council has granted Earth provisional status as a protected heritage world. No species may interfere with your development while the investigation continues." Dex Krall's eyes narrowed slightly. "Though I must admit, your command of our sacred language is surprisingly advanced for such recent discovery." Jack met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps some knowledge remains buried in cultural memory, Ambassador. The connections between our peoples may run deeper than either of us yet understands." After the sex Krall moved on, Mira whispered, "That was close." "Not really," Jack murmured back. "He's fishing for confirmation of what he already suspects, that we've exaggerated the connection. But he can't say so publicly without risking embarrassment if he's wrong. Plus, the possibility that we really are descended from the progenitors is too tantalizing for them to dismiss outright." Rodriguez joined them, nodding toward the departing Veldurian. "Everything secure?" "Absolutely," Jack assured her. "The committee will take years to reach any conclusions, and by then, Earth will be too integrated into galactic affairs for our status to be revoked." "You know," Mira said thoughtfully, "this whole situation reminds me of that old Earth story, the one about the Emperor's new clothes." "With one crucial difference," Jack replied. "In our version, everyone wants to believe the clothes are real, including the Emperor." Rodriguez shook her head in wonder. "I still can't believe it worked. We bluffed our way into protected status with nothing but some linguistic coincidences and fancy pronunciation." "Not coincidences," Jack corrected. "The patterns are real, the interpretation is flexible, and the fact that you can speak their sacred tongue better than they can." Mira asked. Jack shrugged. 6 days of intensive practice and a good ear for phonetics. Apparently that's all it takes to sound like a god to the right audience. As the celebration continued around them, Jack gazed out at the stars, where Earth was just one tiny point of light among countless others. You know what the real joke is, he said softly. In all our history, our species' greatest strength was never our technology or our resources. What was it then? Mira asked. Jack smiled. Our ability to tell a convincing story and make others believe it's their story too. Outside the viewport, the vast galactic arm stretched across the darkness, millions of worlds spinning in their orbits, none of them yet aware that the newest player in their ancient game had just changed the rules forever, with nothing more than words in a dead language that had never really been alive.